Chapter 1. The Arrangement. Mvalakatan sat silently in her chambers, staring at the communication console that had just delivered the news. Her mind raced with questions and doubts, all rooted in a deep sense of dread. How could her father do this to her? She was supposed to be a diplomat like her mother, bridging cultures and creating harmony, not a pawn in an interspecies political arrangement. Yet here she was, facing a fate she had never imagined, bonding with a human. Humans had only recently been integrated into the wider galactic community, and the rumors about them had spread far and wide. Mvala's people, the Zaltharians, were a society that valued elegance, mental serenity, and perfect poise. They believed that harmony was achieved by controlling one's emotions and channeling them into higher pursuits like art, philosophy, and diplomacy. The humans, on the other hand, were everything the Zaltharians despised. Or so the rumors claimed. The stories painted humans as brutal, war-hungry, and physically overpowering. They were said to be uncouth, driven by primal urges, and incapable of understanding the subtleties of higher culture. Mvala shuddered at the thought of being mated to one. She imagined a hulking beast of a creature, all muscle and harsh angles, with eyes that burned with unquenchable fury. Her vivid imagination tortured her with images of a savage creature, barking orders at her, or worse, treating her like some barbaric conquest. The arrangement had been struck between her father, Lord Catan, and the human representatives in the Galactic Council. The Zaltharians had long held a strategic position in the galaxy, controlling key trade routes and diplomatic channels. However, the humans had recently risen in power after a series of victorious skirmishes, and the development of a fleet that had stunned even the oldest and most established races. The Council decided that further bloodshed could be avoided by forming alliances, and that's where Mvala came in. An arranged bonding with a high-ranking human representative would solidify the ties between their species. "Lady Mvala, the human representative has sent a communication," her attendant Solon announced, breaking her from her grim reverie. Mvala's breath caught in her throat. She couldn't bring herself to face this creature, not yet, but duty overruled fear. She nodded at Solon, who activated the console, and the hologram flickered to life. The image was blurry at first, but gradually it solidified into the figure of a human male. To her surprise, he did not look like the monstrous brute she had feared. He was tall, yes, but not excessively so. His face was well defined, his eyes bright and alert, with an expression that seemed more curious than menacing. He had a presence that was undeniably strong, yet there was a calmness to him that she hadn't expected. "Lady Mvalakatan, I am Captain Jason Hale." The human introduced himself, his voice deep but gentle. "I know this arrangement may seem abrupt, but I assure you that I approach this with respect for your customs and your people." Mvala was momentarily speechless. Where was the aggression, the arrogance? He didn't seem to fit the fearsome reputation of his kind. But she quickly masked her surprise and adopted the calm, formal tone expected of a Zaltharian noblewoman. "Captain Hale, your reputation precedes you," she replied, careful to choose her words. "I trust that you understand the gravity of this arrangement." He nodded solemnly. "I do, and I'm here to prove that this alliance can be built on more than just political necessity. I hope we can understand each other better, Lady Mvala, not just as representatives, but as individuals." His words struck a chord in her, and for a fleeting moment she wondered if perhaps she had misjudged the entire situation. Yet her doubts remained, gnawing at the edges of her mind. Could she really trust him? Could a species so different from hers truly find common ground? As the conversation ended and the hologram faded, Mvala felt a mix of emotions. There was still fear, yes, but now there was also a hint of curiosity. She had expected the worst, and instead she had encountered something intriguing. Chapter 2. The Encounter. The day of the formal meeting between the Zaltharians and the humans had arrived, and Mvala found herself anxiously preparing. She had never been this nervous in her life, not even during high-stakes diplomatic negotiations. Solon fussed over her attire, a flowing gown adorned with bioluminescent patterns that symbolized calm and unity. Every detail was meant to convey the values of her people: grace, wisdom, and peace. "You look perfect, Lady Mavala," Solon assured her. "Remember, you represent the dignity of our people." Mavala nodded, taking a deep breath. She was determined to approach this with the poise her family expected, even if her heart raced with apprehension. Her mind still swirled with conflicting thoughts about what this Captain Hale would be like in person. Could she truly trust him, or was he simply putting on a diplomatic front? When she entered the Grand Hall, she was greeted by the sight of human representatives standing alongside the Zaltharian council members. The humans, dressed in their formal military attire, were a stark contrast to the flowing robes and serene demeanor of the Zaltharians. But what caught her attention immediately was Captain Hale. He stood with a quiet confidence, his eyes scanning the room until they met hers. There was no mistaking it. He was strong, with a build that spoke of rigorous training and discipline. But what stood out even more was the way he held himself. His posture was straight but not rigid, his gaze firm yet not intimidating. He offered her a respectful nod, acknowledging her presence. As they were introduced, Mavala was struck again by how different he was from the image she had conjured in her mind. His voice was steady, with a warmth that carried none of the harshness she had feared. Up close, she could see that his eyes were a deep blue, almost like the tranquil oceans of her home planet. There was an intelligence there, a sense of awareness that put her slightly at ease. "Lady Mavala," Captain Hale began, his tone formal but sincere, "it's an honor to meet you in person. I hope this meeting can serve as the first step toward understanding and mutual respect." She inclined her head, hiding her surprise at his words. "The honor is mutual, Captain Hale. It is said that trust is built over time, and I believe we both have much to learn about each other's cultures." For a moment, the room seemed to fade into the background as they exchanged words. There was a guarded politeness between them, but beneath that, Mavala sensed something more. A willingness, perhaps, to bridge the gap that separated their worlds. But still, she couldn't shake her fears entirely. She knew that humans were capable of violence, and she wondered what this man was truly like when pushed to his limits. The formalities of the meeting gave way to discussions about culture, shared goals, and the future of their alliance. Captain Hale listened intently as the Zaltharian Council members spoke of their values, and he responded thoughtfully, showing a surprising level of insight into their ways. Mavala watched him closely, searching for any signs of the brutality that humans were infamous for. But all she saw was someone who seemed genuinely interested in building a bridge between their species. As the meeting concluded, Captain Hale approached her. "Lady Mavala, if you're willing, I'd like to learn more about your people directly from you. Perhaps we could explore your city together." The offer caught her off guard. It was a bold request, yet there was no hint of arrogance in his tone, only curiosity and a desire to understand. She hesitated, but then decided that it was better to face her fears head-on. "Very well, Captain Hale. I shall show you what it means to be Zaltharian," she replied with a slight smile. Chapter 3. Beneath the Surface. The following days were filled with unexpected revelations for Mavala. She took Captain Hale on a tour of her home city, a place of elegant architecture, shimmering gardens, and tranquil waterways. It was a city designed to reflect the harmony her people prized above all else. As they walked, she found herself explaining the deeper philosophy behind every structure, every piece of art, every custom. And to her surprise, Captain Hale listened with genuine interest, asking questions that showed a deeper understanding than she had anticipated. But it wasn't just the captain who was learning. Mavala was also beginning to see past her own preconceived notions. As they conversed, she realized that humans were far more complex than she had given them credit for. Captain Hale spoke of his own world, of its struggles and triumphs, of the fierce loyalty and sense of community that bound his people together. He didn't shy away from discussing the violent history of his kind, but he framed it as a lesson in growth, a path toward something better. Mavala couldn't help but be impressed by his perspective. He was not the unrefined brute she had feared. He was thoughtful, empathetic, and driven by a sense of duty. Not Mavala couldn't help but be impressed by Captain Hale's perspective. He was not the unrefined brute she had feared. He was thoughtful, empathetic, and driven by a sense of duty not unlike her own. He even had a subtle sense of humor, one that she found surprisingly disarming. Yet even as she found herself warming to him, a small part of her remained wary. Could someone like him, with such a strong background in combat and warfare, really possess a gentle nature at his core? One afternoon, as they strolled through a garden filled with bioluminescent flowers, their conversation took an unexpected turn. They were discussing the significance of the glowing petals, which were said to represent the balance between light and dark in Zaltharian philosophy. "Your people's commitment to balance is admirable," Hale remarked, his eyes reflecting the soft glow of the plants. "It's something we humans could learn from. We tend to lean heavily into extremes." Mavala raised an eyebrow. "Extremes can be dangerous. Too much aggression leads to conflict. Too much passivity leads to decay." "True," Hale agreed. "But sometimes those extremes are necessary to achieve balance in the end. My people have had to fight for everything we've built. And while that's left scars on our history, it's also given us a resilience that defines who we are." Mavala considered his words carefully. There was a truth there she couldn't deny. She had read about humanity's rise from their war-torn past to becoming a spacefaring civilization. They had overcome countless obstacles, from planetary disasters to internal conflicts, and they had done so with sheer determination. Still, she wondered how that resilience might manifest in a more personal context. Would it make humans rigid and unyielding in their relationships? Or could it also be a source of strength in times of hardship? Does that resilience also apply to more intimate bonds? Mavala asked, her voice quieter now, unsure of how to frame her question without revealing too much of her anxiety. Captain Hale seemed to catch the shift in her tone. He paused, clearly choosing his words carefully. "Resilience in bonds isn't about dominance or control, if that's what you're asking. It's about commitment, about being there even when things get difficult. I think any meaningful relationship, whether between species or individuals, is built on that foundation." His response was both reassuring and unsettling. Mavala had always believed that a bond between mates should be about mutual respect and understanding, but she had feared that a human might see it differently, as a conquest or a duty imposed by tradition. Hale's words, however, suggested that he held similar values to her own. But could she trust that sentiment when she knew so little of his people's inner nature? It was one thing to discuss philosophy in the peaceful setting of a garden. It was another to face the reality of what their bond might entail. What would happen if they disagreed, if their cultures clashed, or if his resilience took on a harsher form? She needed to know more, to see if his words matched his actions. That evening, Mavala decided to test him. During their next meeting, she intentionally brought up a sensitive topic: humanity's history of warfare, and how it contrasted with Zaltharian ideals. She expected him to become defensive or even aggressive, but instead he surprised her again. "I won't pretend that humanity's history is without bloodshed," Hale admitted, his tone serious but calm. "We've made more mistakes than I can count, and we've paid the price for them. But every conflict has taught us something. We've learned that peace isn't just the absence of war. It's something you have to nurture, something you have to fight for in its own way." Mavala's eyes narrowed slightly. "And what if nurturing that peace requires force? Would you resort to violence if you believed it was necessary?" Hale met her gaze without flinching. "Only if it was a last resort, and only to protect those who can't protect themselves. But I'd much rather find a solution that doesn't involve violence. In my experience, the real strength lies in knowing when to avoid a fight, not in winning one." His answer resonated with her in a way she hadn't expected. There was a wisdom in his words that she hadn't associated with humans, at least not based on the tales she'd heard. She found herself beginning to question the very stereotypes she had held so firmly. Perhaps there was more to humanity than brute strength. Perhaps beneath their warrior culture, there was a depth she hadn't fully understood. Yet, there was still one lingering doubt that troubled her: the issue of physicality. The bonding ritual between their species would involve close contact, something she had dreaded due to her fear of human aggression. She couldn't ignore the fact that humans were physically stronger, and that strength could easily be turned against her. Would he be gentle, or would his instincts lead him to act with the raw power she had feared all along? Chapter 4: The Ritual and Revelation. The time for the bonding ceremony drew near, and Mavala's anxiety resurfaced with renewed intensity. She knew that the ritual was more than just a symbolic gesture. It was a merging of energies, a physical and spiritual connection that would solidify their alliance. Among Zaltharians, such rituals were a deeply intimate act, involving trust, vulnerability, and the sharing of one's inner essence. As the day approached, Mavala's fears reached a breaking point. She couldn't hold back any longer and decided to confront Hale directly. She invited him to meet her in one of the meditation chambers, a serene space filled with soft light and calming music. It was a place where Zaltharians sought clarity and peace, and she hoped it would give her the courage to speak openly. When Hale arrived, she could see the concern in his eyes. He had noticed her growing tension and seemed genuinely worried. Before he could ask what was wrong, she took a deep breath and spoke. "Captain Hale, before we go through with this bonding, there's something I need to understand," she began, her voice steady but laced with uncertainty. "I've heard so much about human strength and how it can be overwhelming. I need to know what I'm truly agreeing to. Will you be able to control yourself? Will you respect my boundaries?" Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, Hale's expression softened in a way that made him seem almost vulnerable. He didn't rush to respond, instead taking a moment to process her concerns. When he finally spoke, his voice was filled with sincerity. "Mavala, I understand your fears. You've been told stories that paint my people as dangerous, and I won't deny that we have a capacity for violence. But strength isn't about overpowering others, it's about protecting them. I would never do anything to harm you, especially in something as sacred as this bonding. If you feel uncomfortable at any point, we'll stop. No alliance is worth your pain." His words were like a balm to her troubled mind. For the first time, she felt that maybe, just maybe, she could trust him. There was no hint of aggression in his tone, only a genuine desire to make this work. It was in that moment that she realized something profound. Hale wasn't just a representative of his species. He was someone who truly valued the connection they were about to form. The day of the ceremony arrived, and Mavala felt a mixture of anticipation and calm. The ritual was held in a sacred hall, surrounded by elders and representatives from both their species. The air was thick with the scent of incense, and soft melodic chants filled the space. Mavala and Hale stood at the center, facing each other as the officiant began the invocation. As the bonding progressed, Mavala felt a warmth spreading from Hale's presence. Their energies began to intertwine, guided by the ritual's ancient rhythm. To her surprise, there was nothing forceful or overwhelming about it. Hale's energy was strong, yes, but it was also controlled, tempered by a gentle care that put her at ease. It was as if he was holding back, not out of reluctance, but out of respect for her boundaries. When the final step of the ritual arrived, a symbolic merging of their physical forms through a shared embrace, Mavala's heart raced. This was the moment she had dreaded most, the point where she feared Hale's human strength would manifest in a way that might overtake her. But as he reached out, his touch was incredibly light, his hands gentle as they rested on her arms. "You're safe," he whispered, his voice barely audible, but filled with conviction. Mavala closed her eyes and let herself relax into the embrace. The fear she had clung to for so long melted away, replaced by a sense of peace she hadn't thought possible. In that moment, she realized that she had been wrong to judge him based on the fears and prejudices of others. This was not a creature of brutality. This was someone who had chosen restraint, who valued her comfort and trust above all else. As the ritual concluded, Mavala opened her eyes and looked up at Hale. He smiled, and for the first time she returned the gesture fully, without reservation. "Thank you, Jason," she said softly, using his given name for the first time, "for proving that strength isn't just about power, it's about compassion." The ceremony was met with applause and approval from both sides. But for Mavala, the real victory was the bond they had formed, not just as representatives of their species, but as individuals who had found a way to bridge their differences. As they left the hall, walking side by side, Mavala knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, not as strangers, but as partners who had learned to trust beyond fear.